the Buddha's standards or yours? When the Buddha talks about the three kinds of fabrication, bodily, verbal, and mental, he does it in two contexts. One is in the context of describing how different actions lead to different levels of rebirth. In other words, fabrication on a macro level. He says that if you fabricate an injurious bodily, verbal, or mental fabrication, then whether you're alert to it or not, in other words, alert to the intention behind it, alert to what you're doing, the fact that there is an intention in there someplace means that you go to an injurious place. On the other hand, if you fabricate these things in a non-injurious way, again, whether you're alert or not, to what you're doing, you go to a non-injurious place. So the way we fabricate things, the way we act, the intentions we act on, have huge consequences in the future. The other context he talks about is in the context of meditation. And here he defines fabrication not as actions in general, but very specific ones. Action is the in and out breath. Verbal fabrication is directed thought and evaluation, the way the mind talks to itself. Mental fabrication consists of perceptions and feelings. Feelings here not so much as emotions, but rather as feeling tones of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. Now, the way these things are defined, you can see that they don't happen only when you're meditating. It's not that you're going to do jhana and suddenly say, well, I'm going to do some directed thought and some evaluation. The mind's doing these things all the time. And then, of course, you're breathing all the time, and the mind's dealing with feelings and perceptions all the time. But the Buddha's highlighting the fact that when you're meditating, you get to see these things really clearly, especially if the breath is the topic of your meditation. You're directing your thoughts to the breath. You're evaluating the breath. Does it feel good right now? What would feel better? Longer, shorter, faster, slower, deeper, more shallow, heavier, lighter. Then you try out different ways of breathing. This is a way we act in lots of different circumstances, not only when we meditate. It's simply a matter of learning how to do it with more skill and more sensitivity. As for feelings and perceptions, the feeling of pleasure that you're trying to create with the breath and the perceptions you have around the feelings, the perceptions you have around the breath, are all going to have an impact on shaping your mind. So what you've got here is a microcosm. These are the forces that are going to shape the rest of your life and your future lifetimes as long as you're continuing to wander on. They're right here. I read a scholar talking about how these two ways of explaining the three kinds of fabrication were totally unrelated, which is missing the point. How are you going to learn about the big processes unless you look at where they come from? They come from the mind. That verse at the beginning of the Dhammapada, the mind is the forerunner of all things. Most people treat it as a nice sentiment, but they don't realize the implications. The way you shape your experience is going to determine your happiness. It's going to determine your suffering. And what do you shape it with? Bodily, verbal, and mental fabrication. These things are done in response to events from outside and, more importantly, they go also out proactively, looking for things, shaping things. Even before you've seen sights, before you've heard sounds, your mind is already inclined to shape them in a certain way. We see this most clearly in people with very strong doctrinaire political views. Person X says something. The people who hate Person X already are going to find something wrong with it, regardless of what X says. If Y says something and they like Y, then no matter how stupid Y can be, they still like him. It's because of the way they're already fabricating things before anything happens. Of course, this doesn't only happen in politics. We have certain attitudes about our feelings, our emotions, and so when a particular emotion comes up, we ride with it, even though it may be very detrimental. This is why we create suffering, because the mind is already biased. A particular impulse comes up, and for some impulses, the way is wide open in the mind. For other impulses, there are a lot of checks and obstacles. Sometimes they have very little to do with whether the impulse is skillful or not skillful. A lot of it has to do with things we like and don't like, but then our likes are very arbitrary. Seeing them as fabricated is going to be a huge step in making it a lot easier to practice. You may hold on to a particular like, and you don't like it when people don't react well to your like. It takes a while to realize, well, maybe I shouldn't like this, or maybe I shouldn't hold on to that particular preference in this particular circumstance. This is probably one of the reasons why the Buddha focuses on suffering, because it's only when you see yourself creating suffering that you're willing to change your ways. Otherwise, you just keep banging your head and complaining about the wall being in the way without thinking, maybe I should stop moving my head in that particular direction. But it's when you can see that you're creating the suffering, or at least willing to give that option a try, that's when you can be taught. That's why the Buddha teaches right there, at the point where you're most susceptible to maybe wanting to listen. I was reading a book on the Noble Eightfold Path a while back, where the author was saying that even the Buddha engaged in unskillful speech. Well, it turned out what this author meant by unskillful speech was saying things that people don't like. Now, there's nothing necessarily harmful about saying things that people don't like. The Buddha said, though, that you have to watch for the right time and the right place. But the idea that people's likes should be the determining factor is creating a tyranny of emotions. Just because one person doesn't like what the Buddha is saying doesn't mean that what the Buddha said was not skillful. What made it skillful was that it was 1. True, 2. Beneficial, and 3. He would choose the right time and the right place to be pleasing or displeasing. That's a much higher standard, and it's a much more livable standard. Because if we take our likes and dislikes as the measurement of the world, we'll never come to any peace. You have to step back from them and ask yourself, these things that I like, do they really lead to happiness? The things I don't like, do they really lead to suffering? Ajahn Suwat would often point out one very obvious example. We don't like suffering. We treat it as an enemy. But he said we should learn how to treat it as a friend, not the kind of friend where you can let down your guard, but the kind of friend you want to spend some time with to get to know this person. We take craving as our friend, and yet we should see it as our enemy. It's under the force of craving that we do all kinds of harmful things, and then we don't even admit that there was any harm done. Or if we admit that there was harm done, we didn't mean to, or we weren't responsible, or the person who was harmed doesn't matter. All kinds of ways the mind can justify harmful behavior to itself because it likes it. So we have to learn how to step back from our likes and dislikes, step back from our cravings and the emotions that cover up the cravings. We have to really look at them and say, maybe it's time to try measuring ourselves against the Buddha's standard, rather than measuring him against ours. There's a passage where the Buddha talks about the stages in going from looking for a teacher to finally gaining awakening. First, you try to find the right person. Then you learn how to listen to what that person has to say, thinking it through. And then there comes the stage which the Buddha calls measuring or putting in the balance. And basically, what that means is putting your habits and likes and dislikes in the balance against the Buddha's standards. you're willing to use his standards to measure your likes and dislikes. That's when he says you can begin to generate a desire to practice, and you find that you benefit a lot more from the Dhamma when you do. We chant, Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo. Every night and every morning, the Blessed One's Dhamma is well taught. This is what it means. It's worthy of taking as a standard, even in areas where you don't like it, because otherwise we keep on fabricating in lots of unskillful ways, and we bring our preconceived notions and our prejudices and our biases and our likes and dislikes to everything that happens, everything that comes to us, and everything we go out looking for, and everything gets skewed as a result. We look at a line and it doesn't look straight. Well, maybe it's because the glasses we're wearing have a curve, turning everything that's straight into something that's curved. Maybe it's time we took off those glasses and gave the Buddha the benefit of the doubt. After all, people for many, many centuries have been finding that, yes, the Buddha's Dhamma is well taught. Nobody chants about our likes and dislikes being well formulated. We're the only ones who think that way. It's one of the reasons why we suffer. So it's good to step back. Look at this process of fabrication. Look at the way you breathe. Look at the way you talk to yourself. Look to the feelings. In other words, feeling tones you hold on to. Look at the perceptions you hold on to. Remember these simple things that are happening right here, right now. You're engaging in them right here, right now, and they can have huge consequences. The heedful response, and the response that has goodwill for yourself and those around you, is to decide that you want to do these things skillfully, taking the Buddha's standards for what counts as skillful as your measurement. At the very least, give it a try. To Prince Abhaya, Abhaya Rajakumara Sutta. In this discourse, the Buddha shows the factors that go into deciding what is and is not worth saying. The main factors are three: whether or not a statement is true, whether or not it is beneficial, and whether or not it is pleasing to others. The Buddha himself would state only those things that are true and beneficial, and would have a sense of time for when pleasing and unpleasing things should be said. Notice that the possibility that a statement might be untrue yet beneficial is not even entertained. This discourse also shows, in action, the Buddha's teaching on the four categories of questions and how they should be answered. The prince asks him two questions, and in both cases he responds first with a counter-question, before going on to give an analytical answer to the first question and a categorical answer to the second. Each counter-question serves a double function: to give the prince a familiar reference point for understanding the answer about to come, and also to give him a chance to speak of his own intelligence and good motives. This provides him with the opportunity to save face after being stymied in his desire to best the Buddha in argument. The commentary notes that the prince had placed his infant son on his lap as a cheap debater's trick. If the Buddha had put him in an uncomfortable spot in the debate, the prince would have pinched his son, causing him to cry, and thus effectively bringing the debate to a halt. The Buddha, however, uses the infant's presence to remove any sense of a debate and also to make an effective point. Taking Nigantha Nataputta's image of a dangerous object stuck in the throat, he applies it to the infant, and then goes on to make the point that, unlike the Niganthas, who were content to leave someone with a potentially lethal object in the throat, the Buddha's desire is to remove such objects out of sympathy and compassion. In this way, he brings the prince over to his side, converting a potential opponent into a disciple. Thus, this discourse is not only about right speech, but also shows right speech in action. heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo forest, the squirrel sanctuary. Then Prince Abhaya went to Nigantha Nataputta, and on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, Nigantha Nataputta said to him, "Come now, Prince. Refute the words of Gautama, the contemplative, and this admirable report about you will spread afar. The words of Gautama, the contemplative, so mighty, so powerful, were refuted by Prince Abhaya. But how, Lord, will I refute the words of Gautama, the contemplative, so mighty, so powerful? Come now, Prince. Go to Gautama, the contemplative, and on arrival say this: Lord, would the Tathagata say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others? If Gautama the contemplative thus asked answers, the Tathagata would say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others. Then you should say, then how is there any difference between you, Lord, and run-of-the-mill people? For even run-of-the-mill people say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others. But if Gautama the contemplative thus asked answers, the Tathagata would not say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others. Then you should say, then how, Lord, did you say of Devadatta that Devadatta is doomed to deprivation? Devadatta is doomed to hell. Devadatta will stay for an eon. Devadatta is incurable. For Devadatta was upset and disgruntled at those words of yours. When Gautama, the contemplative, is asked this two-pronged question by you, he won't be able to swallow it down or spit it up, just as if a two-horned chestnut one were stuck in a man's throat. He would not be able to swallow it down or spit it up. In the same way, when Gautama the contemplative is asked this two-pronged question by you, he won't be able to swallow it down or spit it up, responding, "As you say, Lord," to Nigantha Nataputta. Prince Abhaya got up from his seat, bowed down to Nigantha Nataputta, circumambulated him, and then went to the Blessed One. On arrival, having bowed down to the Blessed One, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he glanced up at the sun and thought, "Today is not the time to refute the Blessed One's words. Tomorrow in my own home I will refute the Blessed One's words." So he said to the Blessed One, "Lord, may the Blessed One, together with 3 others, acquiesce to my offer of tomorrow's meal." The Blessed One acquiesced with silence. Then Prince Abhaya, understanding the Blessed One's acquiescence, got up from his seat, bowed down to the Blessed One, circumambulated him, and left. Then, after the night had passed, the Blessed One early in the morning adjusted his lower robe, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went to Prince Abhaya's home. On arrival, he sat down on a seat made ready. Prince Abhaya, with his own hand, served and satisfied the Blessed One with fine staple and non-staple foods. Then, when the Blessed One had eaten and had rinsed his bowl and hands, Prince Abhaya took a lower seat and sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "Lord, would the Tathagata say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others?" "Prince, there is no categorical yes or no answer to that." "Then right here, Lord, the Niganthas are destroyed." "But Prince, why do you say?" "Then right here, Lord, the Niganthas are destroyed. Just yesterday, Lord, I went to Nigantha Nataputta, and he said to me, 'Come now, Prince, go to Gautama the contemplative, and on arrival say this: Lord, would the Tathagata say words that are unendearing and disagreeable to others?' Just as if a two-horned chestnut was stuck in a man's throat, he would not be able to swallow it down or spit it up. In the same way, when Gautama the contemplative is asked this two-pronged question by you, he won't be able to swallow it down or spit it up." Now, at that time, a baby boy was lying face up on the prince's lap. So the Blessed One said to the prince, What do you think, Prince? If this young boy, through your own negligence or that of the nurse, were to take a stick or a piece of gravel into its mouth, what would you do? I would take it out, Lord. If I couldn't get it out right away, then holding its head in my left hand and crooking a finger of my right, I would take it out, even if it meant drawing blood. Why is that? Because I have sympathy for the young boy. In the same way, Prince. 1. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, or not connected with the goal, unendearing and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. 2. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, unendearing and disagreeable to others, he does not say them. 3. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, but unendearing and disagreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time for saying them. 4. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. 5. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say them. Call. 6. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, and endearing and agreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time for saying them. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has sympathy for living beings. Lord, when wise nobles or Brahmins, householders or contemplatives, having formulated questions, come to the Tathagata and ask him, does this line of reasoning appear to his awareness beforehand? If those who approach me ask this, I, thus asked, will answer in this way. Or does the Tathagata come up with the answer on the spot? In that case, Prince, I will ask you a counter question. Answer as you see fit. What do you think? Are you skilled in the parts of a chariot? Yes, Lord. I am skilled in the parts of a chariot. And what do you think? When people come and ask you, what is the name of this part of the chariot? Does this line of reasoning appear to your awareness beforehand? If those who approach me ask this, I, thus asked, will answer in this way. Or do you come up with the answer on the spot? Lord, I am renowned for being skilled in the parts of a chariot. All the parts of a chariot are well known to me. I come up with the answer on the spot. In the same way, Prince, when wise nobles or Brahmins, householders or contemplatives, having formulated questions, come to the Tathagata and ask him, he comes up with the answer on the spot. Why is that? Because the property of the Dhamma is thoroughly penetrated by the Tathagata. From his thorough penetration of the property of the Dhamma, he comes up with the answer on the spot. 2. When this was said, Prince Abhaya said to the Blessed One, Magnificent, Lord, magnificent. Just as if he were to place upright what was overturned, to reveal what was hidden, to show the way to one who was lost, or to carry a lamp into the dark so that those with eyes could see forms. In the same way has the Blessed One, through many lines of reasoning, made the Dhamma clear. I go to the Blessed One for refuge, to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of monks. May the Blessed One remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge from this day forward, for life.